Welcome to the Sundays with Wendy podcast, Tony Stewart.
Hi, Wendy. It's really great to be here.
It is great to be with you in these types of conversations, when we have both lost people so dear, but it is bittersweet to me at the same time.
Well, thank you. I'm rather pleased to be bringing Lynn's story to the world and my story because the book is partly her story and very much mine as the author and of the memoir. And I'm very happy to talk about it. I think that we don't talk about these sorts of things often enough in our culture.
I couldn't agree with you more. And your book is called Carrying the Tiger.
Carrying the tiger. Exactly. Actually, I mean, it's positioned sort of right over my shoulder there.
So this is a reflection in your storytelling about your wife, Lynn, who passed away from cancer.
Yes, Carrying the Tiger is my memoir. It begins just over 10 years ago. It begins on the day that we first learned that the mysterious digestive symptoms that she and her doctors have been trying to track down were actually tumors that were in her lung and her spine that had just wreaked havoc with her system. And no one had looked there in the months that she was going to doctors until that moment. So on the day we learned that she had tumors in her lung and her spine, which we quickly learned were stage 4 and incurable, basically. I mean, no one expected them to be curable. So through about 6 years of the twists and turns of treatment, because in fact she did get into a clinical trial that did extend her life way beyond the 1 or 2 years that we thought we had right at the beginning. Then the drugs stopped working, and as everyone knew would happen. And we did home hospice, and she died beside me right here in the room over my shoulder. The book covers that, which is one of the most intimate and special and beautiful things that ever happened to me. And then my deep grief, my shattering grief. I should actually just say the subtitle of this book is in 3 parts. It's
Yeah, tell us.
So the book is Carrying the Tiger, and the subtitle is Living with Cancer, Dying with Grace, Finding Joy While Grieving. And so the book goes through all 3 of those.
When I looked at the book, you mentioned joy in there 66 times.
I didn't realize that.
I searched it.
Yeah, you have an e-copy of the book. You can do that. I have never done that. I've actually wondered sometimes because when I was trying to decide what the title should be and what is this story, it felt really important to me to put the word joy in that 3rd subtitle and to let you know that this is not just a book about very sad things happening with sad people for 300 pages, which would not be any more fun for you to read than for me to write. But I never actually looked to see how many times I had referenced joy and joyfulness in the text. So thank you for that. I'm glad I did, because that's how I feel about the story.
You and I were talking a little bit before we popped on about how kind of surprised you were. You said you wouldn't have used the word "this is an adventure" even 2 weeks ago, as you're starting to be more public about the book.
Yes, in order to publicize the book, which is available for order now, I should say, but officially comes out in 3 weeks on April 29th. So I'm in this round of having conversations like this one. I think yours will be the first podcast that actually airs that I've been on, but I've recorded several others. And when I started the process, I was not looking forward to this. I'm largely an introvert. Although I have done some public speaking, I'm pretty good at public speaking, but usually I knew what I was going to say. And having a recorded conversation, and especially when people can see us, scared me. And then I had, like, the publicists gave me this cheat sheet, don't forget to mention the name of your book many times and this and that. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I mean, how am I going to do all this? And much to my surprise, every one of the conversations I've had so far, and they've all been long form podcasts like yours, not like a 5-minute radio spot. Every one of them has been fascinating, inspiring to me, has brought me back to why did I do this project? Because they're asking me, why did you do this project? And has reminded me of what this whole adventure has been about, and has made this feel like an adventure rather than some kind of chore.
That's what I have experienced as I've traveled along my journey too. I never thought I'd have a podcast. I never thought I would write. I never thought I would do a foundation, but makes my life more expansive than I ever thought it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's happening to me. A side note that I've shared this maybe a little bit, not on one of my web social posts, but just last week, I started taking a course to become a certified grief educator, a course taught by the great David Kessler of grief.com, who is one of the world's best speakers and educators on the subject of how do you deal with grief. Not because I think I'm going to become a counselor, but because here I am talking about my grief again and again. People want to know about that part of the book in these conversations. And I realize that I like sharing that story. We just don't talk about this stuff enough in the world that all of us go through. Unless you are so unfortunate as to die really early in your life, you have been through grief and you will be through more grief. And we don't talk about it. And I find myself having these conversations and trying to educate people about what my grief was like. And I wrote a book of which a good chunk towards the end of the book is about my grief. I wanted to be more knowledgeable. So I can see that I don't know where that course will take me. I don't know whether a year from now I'm going to be giving talks or to grief groups or running one, facilitating one myself or not. But
Mhm.
I can see that this whole thing is changing the course of my life in a way that I would not have anticipated just 3 or 4 weeks ago.
It is the beauty of it. I really do believe. I know I did some similar things. I became a Reiki master,
Mm-hmm.
and I also went through a reverendship program. And both of them, I wasn't going to take that and, open up shop per se, right?
Right.
But it is really beautifully weaved into, I think, my life and the way this work is coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know, the pathways that have come from it are really cool.
Yes, I'm feeling the same thing. It's part of why I found myself using the word adventure while talking to you before.
Mhm.
Like,
Who would have thought,
this
right?
is starting to feel like an adventure, and I love that.
Well, I love that you are doing that. I mean, I think grief is very scary for people.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't still today. I think there's more outlets for it and more people are talking about it, but there aren't that many groups.
Right. Right.
I mean, you can find some faith-based ones. Those exist. I think Compassionate Friends, I think is, if I'm saying that name right, is
Yes,
another
that's a
well-known
well-known one. Yes.
one. I think there are more online resources after COVID.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I know there are. And also I'm in New York City, and there is a locally extremely well-known one that was started by Gilda Radner years ago,
Oh,
who died
wow.
of ovarian cancer. It was
Mhm.
originally, well, excuse me, I think it was started by Gene Wilder, who was her husband after she died. But it was named Gilda's Club for years, and now it's become something called the Red Door Community. And my sister, who has lost both her husband and a son, has been going to an online grief group for that, and she's also in the New York area for a couple of years now. And that's a tremendous number of resources there, and not specifically religious. Like, I mean, obviously some of the people there are religious and others are spiritual, but that's not where it's coming from. But there aren't that many, and this is a very big city.
There aren't that
And in
many.
this big city, there aren't that many.
Now, I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, you mentioned a book. I read everything I could get my hands on. Anything about death, the afterlife, you name it. I mean, it was crazy reading. But did you have one specific book that really spoke to you?
Yes, not necessarily what you would expect. The book Being Mortal by
Yep.
Atul Gawande, which I read 5 or 6 months after Lynn died, spoke to me tremendously, because here he is trying to shatter the silence that we're talking about. And it's all about how we should spend our adult lives knowing that we're going to die and taking reasonable steps, not morbid, but just reasonable steps. And it isn't all about death. It talks about various things on the way there. And then it has some wonderful chapters having to do with coming to terms with death, choosing hospice, things like that, that resonated with me because I had
Mhm.
just been through that journey for the last 6 or 7 years with Lynn. And I found it reinforcing, like, oh, wow, we did really well here. If I'm going to score myself on a checklist against his suggestions, we did really well. And then other things like, yeah, that was a pretty close call. We almost fell off the track there. I almost talked Lynn out of starting hospice when we did,
Mhm.
which is a trap that partners fall into very much, even though we both wanted her to die at home. And I saw Go one day talking about and interviewing someone about how common that is, that the patient, the person who's dying, may be really ready to, like, I've had enough of these drugs. I've made my peace with the fact that my life is about to end, as Lynn had. And then I'm there and I want another week with her or another month with her. And even though I thought I was with her on that whole journey, suddenly at the last minute, I was sort of saying, well, maybe we could go back to the hospital just for another day or two, just like a day or two of radiation, and that'll give you more strength. And then we'll see. And thank goodness we didn't, actually, because she died 2 weeks later. And those were the 2 weeks of hospice were beautiful.
We had a really beautiful experience with Ben too, and you can make it what you want it to be. And I felt like we just ushered him out of this world with nothing but love.
Exactly.
It was so peaceful. Like, I don't think he would have had it any other way, right?
I felt the same with Lynn. And in our case, it was during COVID. So we had it wasn't the beginning of COVID when New York was super locked down and everyone was scared to death, but it was still the vaccines had just come out and people were still isolating a lot and hardly anyone could come visit in person. But we did some video calls, a lot of phone calls. I read notes to her from her friends, but she spent a lot of time on the phone, and the cancer was going into her brain at that point. And by the second week of hospice, she could no longer do that. But I was there and our friends were there as much as they could be. And she knew that she was surrounded by love. That's what it was all about.
I just love that you're bringing forward these conversations that are difficult and hard and even taboo sometimes.
Mhm.
But in my profession, my first real job as a CPA. So, it's like they always say there's two things you can count on in life: death and taxes.
Yes.
And that's what I'm talking about. And to talk about it so fluidly, like if someone asks me a question about accounting or taxes, it just rolls off the tongue. And if someone asks me a question about grief or death, it just rolls off the tongue.
Yes. I'm increasingly reaching that point. A few months ago, I could talk very fluidly about my grief. And now I'm starting to understand, because of conversations like this, because of the class I'm taking, how it relates to other people's grief. In that last section in my book, at least in the chapter called Shattered, which begins like the day after Lynn died, I found at the time I was journaling the whole time. I mean, this whole book starts with a set of journals that I put on Caring Bridge, originally just to keep our friends and family informed about what was going on with Lynn. It started very mundane, as people use Caring Bridge, here's what's going on. And, we went to this doctor and they said so-and-so. But by the time she died, and she was involved in these posts, I should say. But by the time she died, I had been posting and describing to our friends for 6 or 7 years what was going on. The posts had become much more emotional, and I'd become much more open about sort of that whole layer of what was really going on. So after she died, I couldn't stop posting, which surprised me, because I'm writing a thing called the Lynn Catula Caring Bridge Journal, and Lynn just died. And I wrote a post saying, well, Lynn died, and I guess that's going to be the end of this journal. And 2 days later, I was writing another post. And I went for that next few weeks examining my grief. This is what I had to write about. What did this day feel like? And what does this mean? And you can actually chart in it. The sort of thing that happens to people is that you have one bad day and then you have a good day when you think you're getting over it, quote, getting over it, as if you were really going to get over it. And then again, it comes all roaring back the next day, or whatever, the next hour. And I can actually see that from my posts, where I have a post saying, I think I'm starting to do better here. And it's just so early. And then, a day or two later, I can't stop crying. So I was thinking about my grief, and then I started writing about, well, what does this mean? And what do I think grief is back then in real time, which is the heart of that chapter. And therefore, I've been able to talk about my grief for a long time now. That was 4 years ago that those events happened. But talking about grief in general is now becoming more fluid for me. And I think both are really important. In this case, in the case of my book, Carrying the Tiger, my story, but it's the specificity of, this is what I was feeling, this is what happened to us, that keeps happening again and again, that in some ways makes it universal.
Absolutely.
No one else is having the same experiences, and I'm not imagining that everyone's grief is their own grief. Everyone's cancer is their own cancer. The things that crippled Lynn actually were like side effects, and the fact that it had attacked her spine, which led to spinal operations, it was lung cancer. It wasn't spinal cancer, but that's her story. And I think it's really interesting. And it was like a roller coaster ride for us, but that's her story. And no one else is going to have exactly the same story. But I hope that when we talk about what we ourselves experienced and what this was like for one person in this kind of detail, it allows other people to relate to it better than if I just tried to draw conclusions and say some generalities about what it was like or what it is like, quote unquote, for everyone.
Yeah.
There's no is like for everyone. There's what it's like for you and for me.
Isn't that the goal, to like tell the story and let the reader feel?
Totally. In fact, I consciously tried to do two things in the book. One is to put in a great deal of information, little bits that were the things that really controlled our days or the decisions that we had to make so that you can see them over my shoulder as you read the book. And the other was not to draw any conclusions, not to put in any lessons, because I thought that would be distancing. And then I may also have been influenced by, there's another really good book on grief, famous book by Joan Didion, who extremely successful author. And when her husband died 20 some odd years ago, she wrote a book called The Year of Magical Thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much about the year of her life after he died and her grief, interwoven with memories of him and stories about before, so that you get to know them as a couple in the story. And towards the end of that book, she has a big paragraph, which I actually quote in Carrying the Tiger in a shortened version, because reading it was so powerful for me, in which begins with the sentence, grief turns out to be, and then is written entirely as if everyone had the same grief. As if, oh, I've realized this about grief. She may not have meant it that way. Mm-hmm. She's a very, very smart person, and the whole book has been about her particular grief. But that's how it sounded to me. So I found myself the first half of this huge paragraph, it's like 300 words, I was thinking, yeah, that's what happened to me. That's what happened to me. And then she gets to the second half, and I think, no, that wasn't what happened to me at all. That's not how I feel about my grief. Mm-hmm. And perhaps with the memory of that, I tried not to put anything like that in the book, whether about my cancer or about the decisions we made or about grief. And just let you see what happened to us and see what we confronted, and then see how it played out.
Well, I know this has been, and sounds like it's been so healing for you. Could you read us a little passage?
I would love to. Get the book from over here. And for those who are seeing it on video, there's what the cover looks like with the tiger and carrying.
Who did the cover, by the way? Was that
I still do not know who the graphic designer was. I did it through my publishing services company, and I keep meaning to ask them. The book was designed by a company called Author Imprints, who are wonderful. It's a family business. It's mainly, I'm dealing with a father, David Wogan, and his daughter, Manon Wogan. And I highly recommend them. But if you're going to basically be your own publisher, and this is published by West End Books, there's the logo, and I hired them to take care of a ton of details, including the design. They're fantastic. And we went through multiple iterations of this cover. And in fact, I asked my mailing list, I sent out 3 possible covers to the people on my mailing list and said, which one would you vote for, as part of the process, which was really cool. It's been a really great process. It is not easy. I just want to say that for anyone setting out to do this. I mean, there is easy self-publishing. You can, and I highly recommend this, you can, for almost no money, with very little effort, create a perfectly nice looking book and use Amazon Kindle to upload it, and you can have it as an ebook and in print, and you're done. I wanted to go wider with this. I wanted this to be a book that you might find in a bookstore and not realize that it was self-published. Yeah. And that takes a lot more time and effort and money. So in order to give you a feeling for what this book is about, I'm going to just read you the author's note, which is right up front.
Yeah.
And it goes, in Dante's Inferno, the gates of hell bear the inscription, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. This is not that story. This is a book about how my wife, Lynn, and I navigated severe illness and its aftermath without abandoning hope. Together, we found caring doctors, weathered life-threatening setbacks, learned to live fully in the shadow of death, and shared the intimate grace of her departure from this world. Then, with the help of old friends and new, I climbed out of shattering grief and eased my way towards new love. There was uncertainty, fear, and sorrow, yes, but also tenderness and joy, and I had the honor and privilege of accompanying Lynn on her final journey. I wish I had been able to read something like this when we embarked on our odyssey, stunned, scared, and unsure of what lay ahead. I hope it will help others find their way forward or make peace with what they've already experienced. Although your circumstances may be different from mine, the underlying story is universal and all too rarely shared. Tony Stewart, September 2024.
Tony, that's so beautiful.
Thank you.
When we were trying to plan the podcast, and I'm a CPA and I do lots of other things, and I have not had a chance to read the whole book. I did read the first chapter and scanned a little bit, so at least I could have an intelligent conversation with you. But I can't wait to read it.
I hope so. I mean, I should. So, Carrying the Tiger, Tony Stewart, and the book, I have been amazed by the beautiful advance reviews it's gotten. So I mean, it's like
Yeah,
an
share a couple
editor's
of
pick
those.
at Publishers Weekly Book Life, and Indie Reader called it a master class in learning to taste. It's like, whoa. I mean, yes, of course, I dreamed of responses like that, but
Mhm.
they've been knocking me out. And so I'm reasonably confident now that you will enjoy the process of reading the book. I was scared to death when I decided to do all of this and commit to the major effort of publishing it and
Mhm.
marketing it and talking about it. And now at least I'm highly confident. The lowest level review it's gotten so far is, look, this is a beautifully written book and it's a tender and emotional story, but I wish it didn't have so much of like the medical details and the twists and turns of that. That bogged it down for me. And for me, that's like half of, that's what I said. I was going to put those things in here because I want people to see that that's what it's like.
Mhm.
I want people to see that that's what it can be like and what it was like for us. If I took those details out, maybe more readers that I didn't intend it for would
Mhm.
love the book, but I'd be doing a disservice to the people for whom I wrote the book. And luckily for me, some of the other reviewers have completely ignored that and said, no, I loved it from beginning to end. So I think that's the range of responses to the book will be from mid-range with like, I kind of wish that part didn't have so many details
Yeah.
to, oh my God. I got one of my beta readers. That's the people you send it to. I sent it when I had an early draft and I wasn't sure whether to publish it. And I racked my brains coming up with 20 people who would be, I could reach out to, who I had enough of a connection to ask them to read the book, but who hadn't known me or Lynn during any of those years, and preferably were not particularly close to me now. I found 20 such people, like a high school reunion, that kind of thing.
Oh.
You know, they knew me then and like, oh, sure, I'll read your book. And one of them wrote me back beautiful things about the book. And then in a second email after I like, can I use your quotes in my publicity? She said, Tony, your book helped me transition from the loss of my best friend and then my brother and his wife. I know it will help many more people. I had no idea. I had no idea. But although that actually is the quote with her permission that I have ended up using in some of the marketing, because that's what I wrote the book for.
I love that you stayed true to your authentic voice, and you're never going to please everybody, right?
Right.
But I feel I shared this with you too. I, wrote a story about Ben and shared a shortened version over the podcast season 3, but people have been encouraging me to, tell the full story, and I am. And I feel the same way. I know not everyone is going to agree with my line of thinking, and
Mm-hmm.
it's okay, because they won't be drawn to read it.
Yeah. One of the things that was most important for me to learn in the writing process, and which has been echoed in this grief class I'm taking, but let me just say how I experienced it. I wrote and wrote and wrote and did these drafts, and even the version that I sent out in last August, which was the one the beta readers read, it was still more Lynn's story than mine. I started this as it's a testament to her, and it was her friends. She had the hundreds of friends for Caring Bridge. I'm much more introverted, and I kind of wrote on her coattails for social stuff. And then it became clear to me, and some of the readers told me, like Tony, a memoir is your story.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter that you got the idea to write this because your beloved wife died and you want to share her with the world, which is a part of why I wrote it. The fact is, I did keep writing the book after she died. The last part of it it's my story 100% in the last 100 pages. And a memoir is inherently your story, and you have to be true to your voice.
Mm-hmm.
That's what people want, is to relate to the author of the book, even if it is primarily a book whose subject is about, in my case, my wife, and in your case, your son, who died, and what you went through together, and whatever else you want to put in the book. And what I was going to say is about the class. So I learned in this course I'm taking to become a certified grief educator, which is a course all about grief and grieving and how to help people recover from it, that one of the things people have to do as the person left behind is come to own their own grief and realize that the story is their story and not their late loved one's story. I'm not putting the words exactly right. David Kessler has been doing this for years and said it much better than that. But I was listening to this class where he got to this point of having to realize that the grief is your grief, not your loved one's grief. And the story is of your grief. And I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what I went through in this stage in the last 4 months of writing the book. When I did a whole other pass to say, wait a minute, let me look into when I'm saying I versus we versus she. When am I actually putting into Lynn things that really I was feeling and take them back and own them? And so I would say that was a healing process, even though I didn't have any idea of that at the time. I thought I was doing it because a memoir is your book, but I was also owning my grief and owning my role in the story in the course of writing that final draft.
It is such an interesting process. I mean, I worked on mine. Oh gosh, it's been 10 years plus. And
Mm-hmm.
there were certain times, did you ever feel like you had to go away? Like there were two occasions where I went away for a week at a time on vacation by myself and literally devoted that time. Would get up, drink coffee, work, have lunch, work, dinner, work. I'm not a trained writer.
Right.
So I didn't know how to do it. I don't think I could have done it had I not parsed out a little bit of that time.
That's exactly how this book got written. I've been in a relationship with a woman, and you learn about her in the last part of the book, for the last 4 years, but she primarily lives in Minneapolis. I'm in New York City, and she has family, older parents that she still cares for elsewhere on the East Coast. So I had long periods of time when I was alone in the apartment here where I'm sitting right now. I'm actually at the desk where I wrote large parts of the book.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, this is my comfortable place. I've got a comfortable chair. When I started doing podcasts, I realized I want to sit in this chair, which has been my chair for 20 years, where I have written so many things and where I wrote this whole book. It's where I feel most at home. So I wrote the book in stretches like you're talking about.
Mhm.
When she was away, when I was here, when I could spend the whole day, like
Mhm.
that's what I'm doing today. And then even when we weren't here, there was a period when we were at a house her family owns in Maine, kind of a shared family house, that people come and go. We were there by ourselves for a week or two. And she would go off and do things. And I would sit there with this beautiful outdoors around the house. I would sit there in the house working away. It was so intense. It was so fulfilling. You really get into it. And it still took me a year. And I started with 700 pages of Caring Bridge. I started out the writing process with the Caring Bridge posts and the comments from our friends, which play a role in the book, I should say. So it isn't that I was even starting with a blank page, and it took more than a year to get from there to the book as it exists now.
Now, did you do that full time or was that part time when you could squeeze it in? Sounded like.
Somewhere in between. I am retired. I do not have. I'm almost 70 at this point, and I quit my job pretty precipitously while we were preparing for Lynn's memorial, and I was 65 at the time and had not planned to retire. I thought I would work till I was 70 for sure. I really loved the job I had at the end, but I just quit. I couldn't do it anymore. And I have spent the last 5 years on projects really right up till now, all of which relate to Lynn one way or another, because she was a painter and I with her gallery, mounted a retrospective show. We did a big catalog. This took a year of my life. And then there were various aspects of dealing with her painting studio, paintings, creating an archive of her work, which is available on the web, things like that. And that took another year of my life. And it was all very satisfying. And I'm glad that these years passed because I couldn't possibly emotionally have written the book yet.
Mhm.
But then by the time I did sit down to write it, literally the day after we closed on the sale of Lynn's painting studio, by a fluke, she had a painting studio that she co-owned with a friend that they had bought when it was abandoned, and the city sold it to them for $250 in the 1970s when, like, New York was in terrible shape and landlords were abandoning buildings. And it turned out to be worth real money. It's a little tiny co-op unit near Columbia University. So she left me that. That's part of my inheritance from Lynn. But the day we sold the studio, the next day I started working on the book. It's like I had to clear these things, and then it was just calling to me. Okay, you've done everything else. There's nothing left but the book. Which then I think I thought I had finished it at least 3 times, including just after a few months. And then each time came the revelation, no, actually, you thought you had finished it, but it's not good enough. You need to go back and start over and do this, that, and the other. And the multiple iterations, including that last one where I took ownership of it as my story, took a solid year.
You said it is a calling. I even say, like, it wouldn't let me put it down, even if I wanted to.
Exactly.
But in turn, it is a calling and it's like there and there's no ignoring it. But also, it's just like everything else. It's like work and a discipline. I don't know what I thought it would be like, but it is just like everything else I've ever done. There are times I loved it. There were times I was invigorated by it, and there were times that I had to force myself to sit there.
Absolutely. Except I can't say in this year, most of it pulled me to the work. But when people have asked me or assumed, wasn't the experience of writing the book deeply emotional? And I would say some days it was deeply emotional. And some days, sometimes for several days in a row, it was pure craft. I've got all this material, but I want people who didn't know us to read the book and want to keep turning the pages. And that is straight writerly problems. What do I include? How do I tell it? How do I get you to want to keep going in a story that played out? The first part of the book is 6 years of going to doctors and having cancer treatment, which sounds really boring when I say it that way, but which I hope is, invigorating and inspiring and challenging and frustrating, because there were frustrating setbacks when you read it. But that was craft. Do you know, besides these podcast interviews, which have taken me back and which I occasionally find really moving, the time that it really came back to me, I'd written the whole book. I'd had my emotional days and my craft days, and then we'd had to figure out, well, what should the cover look like and all of that. And in January, I sat down to record the audiobook. And that came back to me just now when I was reading the author's note here. And I remembered reading the author's note. It's like the first page of the book. And I cleared the decks. I had a week. I did it at this desk. I hung like sleeping bags and things around me to suppress any echoes, to create a little booth here. I got a good microphone, which is sitting about 3 inches off screen right here. And I started reading that book. And oh my God, that put me back there. I was no longer reading it as an author. You read it as an author, you're constantly saying, I should change this word. And does this sentence belong here? And am I going on too long, or should I say more? And that just kept going for a year. And it keeps you at an emotional remove. But now the book was finished, and I was just reading it. And oh my God, all the memories came flooding back. All the emotions came flooding back. And this is 4 years after she died, almost exactly when I recorded the book.
So you were sitting right there where you're sitting now. That's just so cool.
I was sitting exactly where I am. There's a photo on my website.
Oh, I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should just tell for the I'm sure we would do this at the end, but my website is TonyStewartAuthor.com. If you Google "carrying the tiger," you will also find hits for Tony Stewart Author. You'll learn how to spell my name. And on there I have, and I may post on social also, you'll see this photo of me sitting at this desk with the microphone much closer to my face than it is at this moment, with my cat lying there with her paw stretched out. And I really feel like Lily, my cat, helped me record it. She also helped me write it.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask all my guests that come on the show. Tony, what does the word healing mean to you?
Wow. Healing for me has meant reaching a point where my grief is integrated into my life, and I can get through the day, and now I'm easily get through the day, and the memories primarily bring back happy memories. That's, for me, what the healing journey has been about. And I relate it to my grief. I mean, obviously, Lynn had cancer and there were physical injuries, but for me, the grief healing process has been much more important to me. I love my chapter, Shattered, in the book, about what that first month or 6 weeks was like. And I tend to think that some things happen to me more quickly than they do to many people in terms of healing, because I was journaling every night about what the day was like and what my grief was like and what it meant to me. I don't know. But by the end of that chapter, and this is way sooner than I think it happens for many people, and I should say it was just the first taste of it for me.
Mm-hmm.
I had reached the point where I could look at photos of Lynn and smile.
Mm-hmm.
That was for me 6 weeks in. And I do not mean that it was a panacea and that I stopped crying. But it took about that 6 weeks. And for me, that's what healing is in a microcosm, is reaching the point where when I remember Lynn, and I'm surrounded by her paintings, they're all around me here in the house. I've got photos of her in front of me, and I am living here when she's in town with another woman whom, we love each other. She encouraged me to keep Lynn in my heart and in my life, which is great. But it took a long time before looking at these things was a happy experience. I mean, it took a long time before I wasn't primarily feeling the pain and the loss when I looked at all of these reminders of Lynn. And they started reminding me of the beautiful 35 years we had had together and the happy day on which that photo was taken, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And of Lynn, the painter, who just loved to paint and couldn't stop painting. And those who are seeing this on video, they've got 2 of her paintings right over my shoulder. And there are a lot more around the house.
Mm-hmm.
And now they make me smile.
Mm-hmm. When we were going through our time, it was 2013 to 2016. So we had phones, right? And in the hospitals, you weren't supposed to take pictures, but everyone did. But I got to a point where I kind of didn't take as many pictures because, I wanted to just be as present as I could for him.
Yes.
And so I have pictures, and then people send me pictures, which I love, but I kind of wish I had taken more.
For me, I have enough photo. I mean, I have a zillion photos of Lynn up till the last few months. And I have a few that I cherish during hospice, one of which is certainly on my website. I think it's in the book too. I have photos in the book. If you get the printed version, they're in black and white. If you have an e-reader that is in color, you get to see them in color, and they're all on my website. But I cherish those photos. The thing I regret, I have no videos really at all. We just didn't do videos. I mean, we had phones that were totally capable of it. I have no videos of her. And I did save 4 voicemail messages, which I played again and again over the next 2 years, of things like, "Hi, cutie, I'm at the market. Do you want me to pick up some eggplant?" Literally, that's like the message. And I get to hear her voice. I would say to anyone who happens to be listening, who is with someone they think they might lose for whatever reason, get some videos and get some audio in a way that you will keep. I mean, I had to download the voice messages, and now the system my phone now uses, I don't think I can do that. But luckily, I was able to download them. When we literally shoot a video with our phone and the person talks, then we've got that. That, I desperately wish I had that.
Yeah. Well, what advice would you give to someone who's thinking about, writing a book about a loved one?
No one's ever asked me that question before. I'm going to have to think for a second here. First and most importantly, if you have the urge, do it. Now, when I say writing a book here, the question of whether you get to the point of carrying the tiger that's all printed and bound and available everywhere and has a beautiful cover that I hired someone to make for me, that's a different question than writing a book. Writing a book is a process where the first thing is sit down now and then, make a few minutes at a time here and there, and put down those words that are rattling around and those feelings. And don't worry about writing for anyone else at first.
Mhm.
Because I found the process of putting down in words what I had been thinking and feeling, which I started with these Caring Bridge posts almost in real time, within 24 hours, tremendously healing. And also gave me all this material so that when I then decided I want to take it to the next level as a book, I had a place to start from. And I had all these notes and memories. The sooner you write them down, the more of them you'll have. Then the question of whether you want to keep going, as you've just talked about doing with your book, that will become clear to you over time. And don't feel any pressure, don't feel any pressure at first to write for anyone other than yourself, maybe even ever. If you don't write it for yourself, no one else is going to like it.
Mhm.
They're not going to get what you want from it. Write for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Someone told me, gosh, this was years ago now. She had published something and she said, you're going to spend 80% of your time editing. And you know how
Absolutely.
it's so true.
If you want the book to be read by other people, if you want the book to be the book you wish it were, you will spend 80% of your time editing.
Mhm.
It's in the editing that it transforms from,
Mhm.
I don't want to use a pejorative term. I almost said hot mess, and that's totally the wrong, but a jumble of getting your stuff out. In my case, so let me just say, so all of my Caring Bridge posts were edited because I've been an editor all my life, but they were edited for an hour, right? I would write a post. I would write the post sometimes for
Oh, I
20
would do
minutes.
that too.
Yeah, and then I would edit it for an hour, and then I would upload it, even though I was just keeping in touch with my friends. And that's part of why my friends said, I love reading your posts, because I had edited them. That's one level of editing. Then the first draft of my book, the one that I sat down the day after we sold Lynn's studio and started working on, where 2 months later I thought I had finished, was largely a whole bunch of Caring Bridge posts, carefully selected in order, many of them cut in half from what they had originally been, internally edited, and with a selection of our friends' comments underneath, because a lot of those comments were really interesting and
Mhm.
insightful. And there are you get two kinds of comments. You get the I'm with you, I'm so sorry for you, or whatever. Those are incredibly valuable. If you're ever on Caring Bridge, please do write those comments. 4 words, 5 words, I'm here with you. Those are meaningful, but they're not what I wanted in my book. But in between are these other comments where people say things about what their experience has been or whatever that I thought, wow, this is really cool. And I was about to start giving it to friends to comment on. And it slowly dawned on me, only people who already knew Lynn and already loved Lynn would make it through this. I need to make Lynn real in order for someone to want to do it. And so then I started writing more and more and adding more and more. And then I need to put in the things we left out of the Caring Bridge posts, because there's a ton of the most interesting stuff that you don't share in a Caring Bridge
Mhm.
post, but that makes it real. So that was all a combination of editing and writing new material, which then went through the editing. So there I was. February last year, I had what I thought was the book, and I wasn't finished with it till early January this year.
Mhm.
And all of that time I would call editing.
Well, I am so glad that you kept going forward and it is so beautiful and that you are out here talking about it and sharing it with the world.
Well, thank you, Wendy. This has been a great conversation.
Well, tell us to get your website. I know you mentioned it earlier, and I'll leave it in the show notes and in the post. But
Sure. So my name is Tony Stewart. That's spelled STEWART. The website is TonyStewartAuthor.com. The book is Carrying the Tiger. And if you Google Carrying the Tiger, most of the hits that you'll get before it turns into other things relate to me, and you'll find the website on there, and you can buy it. It's like everywhere. It's at Amazon, but everywhere right now.
like I said, I cannot wait to have a few days where I can read it, and I very much look forward to that.
And I hope you'll shoot me a note when you do and let me know what you thought. Really what you thought, not, not a blurb.
I will. I promise.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you for coming on.
You're very welcome, Wendy.